Hello, y'all. Welcome. I am Pedro Ceniceros, today's gracious host, and joining me for today's episode is none other than Jorge Gomez. Would you mind telling us a little bit more about yourself, Jorge?
So I'm Professor Gomez. I teach English here at the Rio Grande campus of El Paso Community College. And I'm very excited to and honored to be here as a guest for y'all's Long Story Short podcast.
We are so honored to have you, and thank you for accepting our invitation today. And I would like to thank you all for watching today's episode. You are watching Long Story Short, a 2024-2025 EPCC/UTEP Humanities Collaborative project. Try saying that 5 times in a row. Now, today we will be discussing none other than Javier Zamora's Solito, a memoir. Now, would you mind getting us started with an overview of this book, which was published in September 6th of 2022?
Yeah, this is I was rereading it because I had read it I think last year. And given what's going on right now with the issue of immigration, I think it's one of the most relevant reads people could have, in their bookshelf. The story of a poet, Javier Zamora, his memoir, and how he got here to the United States from El Salvador. It's a very gripping read, and it's ordered chronologically. But you really get to see the sacrifices that people make, coming from Latin America, really from all over the world, and the perseverance that was required, for him to be where he is now.
I really agree. The book is really detailed and it's full of harrowing detail, but at the same time, it's beautiful, I think. Well, without giving too much of my own opinion, what was your favorite part about the memoir and which was your least favorite?
Good question. Probably my favorite part was knowing that he made it safe.
Yeah.
I didn't like peek into what was going to be the solution, right? I didn't know that he made it in the end because I actually was fortunate to meet him in 2019
Really?
at the Texas Book Festival through the support of none other than the Humanities Collaborative, actually. And so I already knew that the end journey in that regard, but I didn't exactly know like what was going to be the mechanism, right? Like if he had to go back home and apply again, for a visa. I think the ending was probably my favorite part, because like so much of it is so stressful, just reading about, are they going to get caught? Is there going to be some kind of violence that they experience, things like that. And as an immigrant myself, probably the least favorite part, and I'd like to get your take as well, Pedro, of your least and favorite part. Is probably the moments, the interactions with Border Patrol. Being in Juarez, I know firsthand the treatment that we get when we cross through the CBP, the agents in blue. And people would think, that given that they're customs, that they don't have the same kind of the discriminatory practices that Border Patrol has. But I've experienced the same. Students shared, that they have the same kind of mistreatment and discrimination that they face. And so, yeah, I would say it's probably all the moments, anytime that Border Patrol comes in, and there's always this kind of the way that they act, sometimes they were pretending to be nice, right? We'll give you food, we'll take you. But of course we all know that, like, they're other than those basic necessities, they're going to be sent back. And they're just looking for, something for them to sign, so that they won't come back. So yeah, I would say it's probably my least favorite part.
I
What about you?
I think it's really interesting that you mentioned the CBP scenes because while I did dislike all of the scenes that they were imprisoned or detained, there was one particular instance with Mr. Gonzalez, the CBP agent who showed them mercy and kindness
Mm.
and did give them basic necessities, but despite the fact that he did end up taking them to the border and telling them to go back,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like he was compassionate because he told them next time rest 4 days instead of coming right back,
Mm-hmm.
kind of like encouraging them to come back
Right.
to get their own chance. So to me, that just revealed like the complexity of the CBP agents themselves. Like they're not just one-dimensional beings; they also have complexities because obviously Mr. Gonzalez is Hispanic in nature, so it might have been like a conflict of interest for him. And I thought that was a really interesting detail, I guess.
Yeah.
But my least favorite part was the when they're crossing the desert and they don't have any water at all, and they're just walking to the point that Javiercito just passes out and he doesn't know what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I've never been through that myself, but with the amount of detail that Zamora puts in the pages, it's just you can feel the desert heat burning at your back. You can feel the sand getting in between your shoes. It's just so detailed that I hated that scene because I could feel myself baking along with Javiercito. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know if you all, you mentioned, and neither have I, anything remotely like that, the desert crossing, the attention to the environment, right? Like even at night, you know, um, dealing with the elements. But there's another great book that I would also compare it to, Devil's Highway by Luis Alberto Rea.
Yes, I've gotten the chance to read a little bit of it, but
Yeah.
not all.
Because it also does, highlight the journey. This one through the Devil's Highway, as they call it in Arizona, and very similar, with polleros and coyotes and yeah, I mean. Except that one, I mean, Reese himself, didn't take the journey. He's talking about the people that he was able to conduct an ethnography on. And in itself, similar to Tim O'Brien's Things They Carried, which, is one of the popular reads about the belongings that people have. And it was in that book, that I learned about the survival tactics that migrants take, like, drinking their own urine, which at a certain point, becomes toxic. But when it comes to like doing it to avoid dehydration, is at least like one last resort that they can take at least once.
That's really interesting because Zamora does mention a lot of the tactics as well. Like I did read some of the tactics that they use in Urrea's book, and Zamora does allude very closely to what they do, like taping up the bottles, making sure that there's no reflection anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
I feel for those people, man. Well, sorry, getting a little bit off topic. So we just covered the first two questions here, but besides the literal journey north, did you notice any other types of journeys going on in the story?
Yeah, that's another good question. I think to me this is about the family separation, because he's out here on his own, right? He doesn't have his family there, and yet he's able to build a new family to a certain degree, right? Even though, I'm sure you as well, on the back of your head, in terms of that journey, you were thinking of like, well, is anyone going to try to take advantage of it, right?
Yeah.
Given that he's so young, he's still so naive. But I think in terms of like the overall journey, just kind of thinking about all the different stops that they make, how he's able to acquire like different pieces of the cultura, right? From being from El Salvador, to me, the book really shines in how he's able to make connections between his own home country and not just the U.S. but also Mexico
In Guatemala.
and Guatemala. Yeah.
See, like a good example of that, I would say, was the tortilla observations. Like he kept saying, the further north he goes, the thinner the tortillas get,
Mm.
which to me was an interesting like change because what you eat is part of your culture, you know.
Yeah, I mean, details like that, right? That go beyond just like the point A to point B mapping, and really go into the how similar we are, right? And being Latina, like if we identify as Latina, um, and yet also facing the commodification, gentrification, the rampant poverty that forces them, right, to make that journey in the first place. So there's a lot of complexity there because, I mean, of course, you're rooting for them, but you also, you can't help but feel all the more because of how much of that he's seen, right, and how much of it is like kind of making him question, right, like, is this really something that I can do? Is this something that I'm going to be able to do on my own?
I'm glad that you brought that up because the journey itself, it's very dehumanizing to the immigrants. From point A to throughout the journey, they experience all of this humiliation. Um, can you think of any examples in the book that shows explicitly how the immigrants are dehumanized?
Mm. um well, aside from the CBP encounters and Border Patrol, I think one thing that, just like with the Devil's Highway, this book really opens up people's eyes is how immigration, as an issue, um, yes, it of course affects Mexicans, but the way that it affects people from South America and Central America is even worse. Because they don't just have to worry about once they get here, making it across the border and evading Border Patrol. They also have to deal with Border Patrol at the south, by Chiapas and the Mexican border in the south. And throughout that journey, so many times that they have to worry about the Mexican, I forget what it's called exactly, but like, their own Border Patrol, their Policía Federal, um, because they themselves are corrupt, right? And so there's a double whammy there because it's like, well, who can you trust, right? We don't want to out ourselves either, and so there's a lot of dehumanizing encounters because of they have to pass as Mexican, right? And so there's a kind of dark irony there that if they are outed as people who are not Mexican, they might uh, be thrown in jail, be deported, back to South America.
Honestly, that whole part of the journey when they're traveling through South America, Guatemala, Mexico, and I think they went somewhere else también. But that particular piece of the journey really opened my eyes. I was ignorant to the fact that South Americans deal with much more than Mexican immigrants who can, not to like downplay their experience, of course, but who can just basically jump their neighbor's wall.
Mm-hmm.
I was honestly really surprised that there's so much discrimination from Mexicans to the South Americans. I was like shocked. I was like, no, no way, that's not true. But
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, it is true. It's really eye opening.
Yeah, I mean, I think the U.S. is of course a large part of the problem, right? Because of its immigration practices that, especially right now, are probably one of the worst ever. But with Mexico, I tell my students, like, look at telenovelas, right? And you watch telenovelas and, like, why is it that every Mexican is like a güero, right? And so you see a lot of colorism there, where it's not just colorism, but it's also an anti-indigeneity that people see, whether it's in the government positions or also like in Mexican entertainment, that tries to, whitewash, for lack of the better word, the Mexican identity and present this kind of, almost like pseudo-American, you know, portrait, that isn't really the truth, right? That's hiding the true, the original Mexican identity.
Following up on that, since we're talking about dehumanization of the immigrants, how does Zamora go out of his way to bring humanity back to this marginalized group of society?
Hmm. It sounds a little bit cliche, perhaps, to say, but and in some ways, scholars have pointed out how this itself can be problematic, but his resilience, being so young, right, being just a kid, and I don't know, I don't know about you guys, but like I don't think I could have done that,
Definitely
I probably would have messed up somewhere, got back to my family. But yeah, I mean, one thing about resilience is kind of how these difficult, hardships and extenuating encounters that they have, his ability to, pick up, be such a fast learner, right? I mean, yes, he's naive, but he's also going to like learn from any mistakes. He's going to also look up to examples, and so I think, there's a lot to say about his ability to be so resilient that on the one hand, I mean, people shouldn't have to suffer, but on the other, I mean, if by suffering you become, a better person because you are resilient, right? Like he's not bitter about it. He's not. I mean, there of course might be trauma there still, but you really get a sense that this was something that ultimately made him the such a great person and such a great poet, that he is today.
I am glad that you brought that up because earlier you were telling me before we started the session that you brought another book by Mr. Zamora as well. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about that precursor work?
Yes, I'm glad to. So this is the other book called Unaccompanied. And, to the readers out there, people watching the show, I can't recommend his poetry collection enough. And what's interesting is that this poetry collection is almost like if you were going to read the memoir in poem form. And chronologically, of course, his journey came first. But if we think about the chronology of publication, the poetry collection came first. So that was, interesting because I read the poems first before I read his actual journey. But yet I feel that having read his journey through the poems, I not only was able to connect more, but as someone who, of course, teaches poems, has written one or two poems, in his life, you really get a sense of the power of the written word, because of course the memoir is just, as you were saying, right? I mean, it's so detailed and engaging, but you get a different kind of journey through the poems that he was able to put in accompanied.
Now, since we're talking about both of his works, which both deal with the theme and topic of immigration, why do you think Mr. Zamora wrote these books? Who was he trying to reach with these?
Yeah, and we were kind of talking about this a little bit right at the beginning, is how salient to have these kinds of books and these kinds of conversations right now, because I'm sure, of course, you all have heard, right? It's everywhere, the story of Kilmar, who is himself also from El Salvador, and is being held there, formerly at the prison, the CCOT, that is incredibly inhumane and looks like a concentration camp. But last I heard, he was moved. But regardless, he's not able to be with his wife, where he belongs in Maryland. And so there's a kind of prescience here because Javier Zamora is clearly targeting not just literary people, but also people that make claims about immigration that are not supported by facts, that are dehumanizing, as you mentioned, and that also paint with a broad brush, the people that actually come here because they want a better life. And I think it's important to not ignore that because currently they are the ones in power, right? Currently, the people who are anti-immigrant hold the keys for people like Kilmar to be able to be reunited. But whether it's the story of Kilmar or someone like Javier, who fortunately is here in the U.S., you see the people as they are, right? People, just like you and me. There's really nothing else about them, and that which they really are to me, Americans. I think that's another kind of realization that I have. It's like this is kind of it kind of sounds like a cliche, but like this is the American dream, right? The American dream is like might be a little more inaccessible right now because of the economy, but I think that kind of perseverance and desire to move forward that even as a kid he already possessed is exactly what is going to make him successful. This is why he's such a successful poet and writer.
Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts on that. But during the journey, what do you believe is the point of no return for Javiercito as a little kid?
What do you mean?
Like, there's still a certain point in the story where he can always go back, but at a certain point, it feels like he has no choice but to keep going forward.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a tricky question because I've heard other stories before. I don't know if you are familiar with the story of Dr. Q. He's a neurosurgeon. I believe he's now at the Mayo Clinic, but I teach him in my 1301 because
I remember.
Yeah, he had a similar journey, right? If you remember, because he also crossed the border twice, and I want to say it was the third time where he was finally successful. But just like Javier, you do wonder. Well, I mean, how many times is he going to try, right? Like when? So I think that's kind of why it's kind of a tricky question because, I mean, you could argue that until he was finally successful, until he was finally able to be reunited with his family, there at any point he could have been deported, right? He could have been sent all the way back to El Salvador. So yeah, I mean, it really shows how difficult it is, right? Let alone the journey itself and the dangers that they got, you're exposed to, but the issues that come with once you're finally here, right? Of like finding a safe place to be, finding your family, and finding a way to evade immigration as well. So yeah, I mean, it's complicated, I think.
I agree. Honestly, there was so many points in the story that, I just wanted to tell Javiercito, go back home, man. Go back home to your grandma because you'll be safer there at least. But then we gotta realize that the country at that time is coming out of the throes of a civil war funded by the United States. So is he safer at home or safer undergoing a dangerous journey? It's just harrowing choices all around with this book when you really think about it, which does bring me to my next point. What are your thoughts on his narrative style and narrative choices?
Yeah, I mean, to me, this is I having read some other memoirs. It it's perfectly, this is a perfectly teachable book. So if anyone is like in a history class, a government class, English class, of course, this would be a great book to teach because of how organized it is. And you could kind of think about having different writing prompts from it, right? Because aside from the clear writing and organization, I don't know if yours has it too, because you have the hardback, which might have come first. But does yours also have the questions and topics at the end for discussion on
I don't believe so.
page 386? Or maybe yours has a different pagination.
No, it ends at 385, 86. Yeah, the 386, but there's no questions.
Oh, well, if you want to take a gander, I would recommend this paperback version just because of, having already, because I know as a teacher, like you're always struggling, well, what kinds of questions can I ask that are going to help students think critically, right? And not just like summarize the book. And so he's already providing those kinds of discussion questions, which I can tell you very few authors, do that. Like, other writers like Kali Fajardo Anstein, I know does that for, her book Women of Light. But, not too many books provide this. This is, I think, even better, just makes it so much easier. And like you said, I didn't want to be remiss by not acknowledging the role that the U.S. plays in, going back to the 50s and 60s, right, of like destabilizing these countries in the first place so that the people there are going to be living in war and under the influence of drug wars, poverty, crime, that itself is going to be the impetus for them to come here. And so that there's a large hypocrisy in the United States and in not acknowledging its own history of what it did to these countries, and yet, being somehow surprised that people are going to want to come here from those very countries that they themselves
Stabilize.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's honestly, that was the biggest irony in the book, is just how badly they're treated, especially by Americans, when the whole reason that they're there is because, we messed up their country. Simply putting it candidly. Please don't cancel me, guys. Now, I do have an important question because, the characters are very dynamic, but what were your thoughts on the other immigrants traveling with Javiercito specifically, the six as he called them?
Yeah, I mean, Chino and, the other ones, Patricia, Carla. Yeah, I mean, they're really also fleshed out really well. So I think it's good that, and he talks a lot about it a little bit here about, first of all, there was a lot of trauma in the whole experience, and that is, the first reason why he didn't write this before his poetry collection. Yeah. But second of all, as an adult, being able to come to these memories now as a writer, as a poet, I think really helped the book come together because, I think he's able to throw in, a lot of that rich description, narration. Of course, these are real people, right? So that helps. So he didn't have to worry about, having like two-dimensional characters. But yeah, I mean, there are so many characters that, have their own humor. Given it's such a hard journey, right? I mean, we kind of might be painting a bleak picture, and it is in many parts, but there's a lot of humor, right? Yeah. You mentioned the tortillas and a lot of funny moments. Like a lot of it is like the cultural gap that they have, right? Like he's not speaking a certain way or like saying a word wrong, and so those kinds of interactions, really help break some of that, built up tension, that is throughout the memoir.
I find it interesting that you mentioned the fact that they had conflicts with like the words and stuff, because throughout the book it's implied that the dialect is changing, but in English you can't really detect it. Did you get a chance to read the book in Spanish by any chance?
I did not know,
Me
and
neither.
that would be an interesting exercise. I myself, I do speak Spanish, but when it comes to reading it, I mean, I can read it, but there's still, certain words that I'll have to kind of think about what exactly it means, or I have to look it up. And so that's kind of one thing that I regret as an adult now, is that, and this is something that Jose Olivares talks about in his collection Promises of Gold, that I studied English, but then at the same time, there was a kind of uh, a seesaw relationship, because the more I studied English, the more I kind of felt becoming distant to my Spanish, and so that's one thing that I kind of want to do more, is like read more books in Spanish.
Honestly, me too. I'm losing my Spanish a little bit, and I recently got a bilingual position at my main office job,
Mm.
and it's really helping me like resharpen my skills. But I think reading Solito in Spanish would be a better service, because not only do you already have the copy in English, you have the exact copy in Spanish, and you can use them to cross-reference. But I just wanted to see how like the actual narration changes, if like he changes his wording to be more quote unquote Mexican as he goes north, or if he still uses like the Salvadoran Spanish in the beginning of the book.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's just a mind teaser. Like, what does the book read like in Spanish? So I'll probably be going out of my way to getting a copy también.
Yeah.
Man, so speaking of the characters, I was remiss to not mention this, but Chino himself had a MS-13 tattoo on his chest,
Mm.
and it's not really alluded to in the book. Like, it is like mentioned, but he doesn't really understand what it is.
Mm-hmm.
I had to look it up. So this journey really gives us like the idea that not all people coming over here are two-dimensional, like you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Can you think of any other examples where like the book directly challenges the misconception of immigrants coming to our country?
Yeah, going back to that, right? I mean, that's one of the accusations for Kilmar, is that he has an MS-13 tattoo. But my understanding, and I could be wrong, but my understanding of MS-13 is it's actually more, I want to say, like a U.S. based gang. So it's kind of interesting to see that. Well, this is why he needs to go back to El Salvador. But first of all, with Kilmar, like, it's not in the books, like it's not in the records that he belongs to MS-13. Like, someone was an informant supposedly made that up, because he himself has been accused of making up false information about people who are detained. But yeah, I mean, going back to Chino, I'm trying to remember, because I'm not that good with names. Was it Chino who was it who abandoned them?
Marcelo abandoned them.
Okay,
Yeah.
Marcelo. Yeah, yeah. I mean, because that's one thing that kind of was running through my head, is like, who's gonna betray them? Who's gonna try to sabotage them? Who's gonna like sell them out in exchange for being able to get away, right? Not be caught. Because that's kind of the risk that you pay, right, with these polleros and coyotes, is that you give them your life savings, but then you're at their mercy. And yes, I mean, they have a system that's very thought out, but at the same time, I mean, what else are you going to do, right? You're in the middle of nowhere, and if something happens to you, if you get sick or you get injured, I mean, so yeah, there was a lot of that there, where even from the coyotes and polleros, like, again, it's an accurate portrait, in my view, because I'm sure people have like their conception of it, but just kind of to see actual coyotes, and see, like, of course, they're really just there because they get a lot of money. But at the same time, I mean, they also have, the rules, right? The centipede style, and what don't, like you said, don't wear anything bright. So it's almost like militaristic, the way that they set up that system so that it's successful, right? And you can tell that, well, this is like how they keep their business operating, pretty much like sustaining.
Yeah, it was honestly really shocking to see how organized the exploitative, what's it called? What's the word I'm looking for? The exploitative industry of polleroism is.
Mhm.
Like, it's just shocking how they're so well organized, but at the same time, it's so dangerous
Mhm.
for the people actually taking the journey. But yet, the polleros are very callous about going back and forth, like, oh, I do this all the time.
Mhm.
Which does bring me to another question. The book itself has a lot of themes, like family, abandonment, immigration, trust. How do you think that all these themes play up on each other? Like, do they work? Do they contradict each other?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think I don't find the book itself, contradictory. I think it's complex because of, the journey itself, and the characters, the roles that they play. But I think there's a lot of things are in sync, even though, you know, especially towards the second half of it, there's so many times that you feel it's going to be the last time, right? Like this is the one where he just didn't make it, or someone else, didn't make it. But in terms of the themes, I think, you know, whether it's resilience, like you said, family, trust. Um, I think there's a lot here also about pride, because like you said, there's a lot of dehumanizing tactics from the Mexican government, from the U.S. government, um, and even among like just random encounters with people. Like I said, because of the colorism, um, I think it's almost poetic, the way that you're able to see someone, go through so much hardship and survive, and again, I mean, I can't emphasize enough how um, timely it is to read, a book like this, given what's going on right now, where it's not just migrants from Central and South America, but it's also even international students on F1 visas, green card holders, and even like U.S. citizens, are currently being detained.
Mm-hmm.
So in some ways, this book provides some degree of perspective, because I'm trying to remember, this was like in
22, I think, when it first got published.
okay, and then the journey itself was like what, trying to remember
99.
99.
Yeah.
So students who read this might not have been even born back then, and I think it's important for them to gain perspective about how much things have changed in the U.S. immigration system. And yes, we still have people doing this journey now, but I think in terms of the way that the U.S. government treats them, it's gotten worse because of how they have really expanded the reach of like who is seen as undocumented, right? And like I said, because of the fact that they're even targeting U.S. citizens simply because they look like an immigrant.
It's horrible times we live in, honestly. Well, not to get too political, so I'm gonna stay back from there.
No, it's okay. I think.
But honestly, since we're talking about that, and his goal to make it to La USA, despite all the peril and danger and even facing death, and the resulting 23 years later after the book, would you say that his journey was worth it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to the theme, right, of like the sacrifices that people make to get here. And I think it really, for people who are American, I think they themselves should be the ones who read this, because I think sometimes, no offense to anyone, but like I think sometimes U.S. citizens might take their citizenship for granted because of how much people who are not risk their lives, risk their livelihoods, risk everything, just to have a chance. They're not asking for even like citizenship, right? They're just asking for a chance at working hard, staying here, contributing. They're not criminals. They're good people, just like everyone else. And yeah, I think in the end, you just reading the whole book shows you that it was worth it in the end.
I agree. Honestly, during the entire journey, I was like, it's not worth it, man. Like, go back to, not to sound like, say it like that, but like, go back to where you came from, Javiercito. Like, you'll be better there. But seeing what Zamora made of himself, I would say this journey shaped him to be the man that he is today. And he needed to undergo that journey to be able to get the opportunity to be who he is today. And honestly, it's admirable that so many people come here just for a chance to live a small sliver of the American dream. Uh,
And
sorry.
sorry. No, yeah, I mean, just going back to the example of Dr. Hughes, one of my heroes. He didn't become a neurosurgeon overnight. Of course, he actually started off as a farm worker, if you remember right, in California, and doing a lot of other odd jobs. But once he decided to go to community college, and then finally, ending up in Harvard, I mean, it really shows again, not just that the migrants and people here who become immigrants themselves, once they do have an ability to stay, whether it's through some kind of well, back then, the Braceros program from the 60s, but also people who seek asylum, people who seek refuge. They're not just here doing necessarily like menial jobs, right? Jobs that Americans themselves won't do, like work in the fields. But people who, like Dr. Hughes, show that immigrants themselves have these other skills, of course, right? Like the ability to work the brain. The height to me of what it is to be a physician, I consider is working on the brain, right? What could be a more complex organ than that? And I think Dr. Hugh is in many ways exceptional, but whether it's Dr. Hugh or Javier, I mean, it's all part of their education, right? It's part of their ability to thrive in this environment, be bilingual. And I don't see why other immigrants shouldn't have that opportunity. All that's needed is, of course, an opportunity, but many of them, of course, don't have it.
That's a really good way of putting it. And earlier you mentioned that a lot of Americans don't appreciate the implications of their citizenship, and I was myself one of them because, I was lucky enough to be born on this side of the border. But this book is just eye-opening, and it really gives you a lot of perspective as to the other side of the border. The people who don't have the same opportunities and who have to risk it all just to make it here, just again to get a small sliver of that pie. Now, um, did you have any other thoughts on the entire overall book by any chance? Like your overall disposition towards the book?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the readers out there, like I said, I wouldn't just recommend the memoir, but I think this comes in two, this comes in pairs. Like also read unaccompanied. I have myself looked into seeing if maybe one day we can host Javier here in EPCC. Unfortunately, it hasn't happened, but you never know. Maybe sometime in the future. And yeah, I mean, this is like, and by the way, even if it's the audiobook, because I know I talk to a lot of students, and a lot of students do prefer audiobooks. And she's not on camera, but Serena back here, she's also a big proponent of the library. So even if you don't have the funds to purchase a copy, you can always find a copy at your local library, whether it's the print edition or I know the library also has its own kind of audiobook rental um, uh, available, and even if like so just whatever format you can absorb it in is what I would tell this young generation, because I know many of them do prefer video and audio now more than the print word. So
We really appreciate you accepting the invite to join today's episode. I do have one last question for you, Professor, though. Like, if you don't mind me asking, like, what caught your attention about our project? Like, why did you want to, not that I'm accusing you, of course, but like, why did you want to come on and discuss this book specifically?
well, I'll never pass up an opportunity to talk about books. I do have, if I could, do a little shameless plug here, but
Yeah.
speaking of a podcast, I have my own podcast as well called Literally Literary, that I actually have here with a couple of my colleagues here at APCC. And, we cover books like this one, and, whether it's memoirs, fiction, poetry. And so, yeah, I mean, and plus, me, myself, always being interested in works that deal with immigration, I'm always happy to come aboard. So I'm really grateful that you guys invited me, and I'll look forward to the conversations you guys keep having about books.
Thank you so much for joining us again, Professor, and thank you as well for watching and tuning in. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell icon to follow us whenever we upload a new video. And we'll catch you next time. Drive safe.